The evolving millennial consumer. Okay, to understand millennials, you have to understand them in the context of other generations, because it starts to make more sense. You see, when people think about millennials, they focus on the statistics, they focus on the what, they focus on the how. That's all good, and we're going to touch on that. But the real meat of the puzzle is the why. Why are millennials the way they are? And if you understand that, if you understand the why, then you know how to make smarter choices. So let's put it in context. In 1905, we see the rise of the GI generation. Now, a lot of people know this generation as the greatest generation, which actually Tom Brokaw made up. That was his name that he gave them. But we see a real optimism there, right? This is the turn of the century. We see a lot of pride in America. We see uniformity. We see formality. And for the first time ever, the idea of the quote-unquote teenager arises. There was no word for a teenager before this era. Before this, there were children and there were adults. And you talked about children and you talked about adults, and this little group in between, 13 to 20, had no name. And we start to think about, how are teenagers buying? How are teenagers thinking? What does a teenager's mentality mean for us as consumers, as business owners, as a society? The rise of the teenager happens in this generation. Next, we see the silent generation. The silent generation saw war. They saw the Great Depression. The optimism that was there before begins to, it doesn't die, but it slowly tapers off. And we see a more serious generation. And all of a sudden, this teenager, this boost of information that was coming out about the teenager starts to go away, and children should be seen and not heard. And it dies for a little bit, and it's quiet. And then we see the baby boomers. How many people here are baby boomers? Raise your hand. All right, a lot of baby boomers here. I'm going to talk to you about your generation. You tell me if I'm wrong. You're the baby boomers, not me. All right, so baby boomers, right? This is really interesting because we see, for the first time ever, a true independence. They want to control their own destiny. As they get older, we start to see health and wellness become more important, right? We start to see them becoming more entrepreneurial, creating their own opportunities. This is a generation that evolves so much from the 20s into the 30s and the 40s and the 50s. And what we see is a lesson for all generations. And the lesson is this: we cannot judge a generation while they're still in their infancy. Although today I'm going to talk to you about millennials, and there's a lot of research and a lot of data to support what I'm going to say, we're only in our 20s and early 30s, right? So what does that mean? That means just like your generation, we are going to evolve. And what's true today is true today, but it may not be true in 10 years. When we're looking at Gen X, we see a very different generation than the baby boomers and the millennials. And if you start to notice a trend, what you'll see is GI, optimistic, silent, a little more pessimistic, a little quieter, a little more cautious. Baby boomers, independent, optimistic. Gen X, a little quieter. This is one of the smallest generations, one of the smallest consumer segments, and they feel lost. You'll find that there isn't really a through line, and they know that, and maybe how they're defined is the fact that there isn't really a through line. And they feel sort of upstaged. They feel upstaged from the baby boomers, and they feel upstaged from my generation, the millennials. Millennials are the real segment that people are going after, and there's a reason why. 80 million members strong, the largest generation in human history. So let's define, so we're all on the same page, who they are. Born between about 1980 and 1996, between 18 and 34 years old. You can find some stuff that says 79, you can find some stuff that says 82. The most diverse generation in American history. 42% or so of American millennials are non-white. This is very new, right? This generation is more comfortable with diversity, is more open to conversations around diversity than any other generation so far. We're a generation that was raised on computers and technology. We're going to talk a lot about that, but this is crucial to understand. Information and technology, they used to be scarce. Whoever had the information had the power. No longer, right? One of my first memories, actually, is I must have been 6 years old. I was in first grade, and the first time that I walked into my school's library, the very first time I'm walking in, they're carrying the card catalogs out. If that's not a symbol for what was to come, and computers were coming in. In fact, I don't have a single memory in my brain of not having a computer or some kind of technology in my life. And this is really, really crucial when we talk about the why in just a moment. The most educated and the most underemployed generation. Now, this statistic isn't particularly fair because, like I said, we're still somewhat in our infancy. But it's important to know we're spending more money on education, we're graduating, we're not finding jobs. And if we are finding jobs, a lot of the time we're finding jobs that don't pay enough to pay back those student loans. Big problem. It's also an opportunity. Politically agnostic and generally disconnected. You're about to see a conversation that happens about the election, about who's going to be the next president, and I guarantee you one of the first things you'll hear is millennials don't vote. Millennials are apathetic. Millennials don't care. Only one of those things are true. Millennials don't vote. But it's not because they're apathetic, and it's not because they don't care. It's because they're disconnected. They feel like the system does not respect who they are and how they live, and they feel like the candidates are fake, and they're not authentic no matter what side they're on. And because of that, we see a disconnection. And as business owners and as business people, we can learn from that. Because when we look at that and we see how they handle disconnection on a political level, we see how they handle disconnection on a consumer level. It's the same thing. We have to connect, and we have to get on their page. And finally, they're deeply entrepreneurial. And what's interesting is when you talk to this generation about entrepreneurship, they don't necessarily define it as starting a business. They define it as a certain set of skills, beliefs, ideologies, how they operate in the world. How many millennials do I have here? Who am I talking about? All right, a good amount. Yell out if I'm wrong. That's okay, we can fight. I'm a good debater. Deeply entrepreneurial. They want to take initiative. They want to be invested, right? And whether they have their own company or they work for a company, they feel as though being entrepreneurial is a crucial skill and something that they want to learn and improve upon. But what I promised you we would talk about is why. Why are millennials the way they are? There are three things. Three things that have made this generation grow into the kind of consumers and the kind of people they are. The first thing is information, technology, and how that has shaped advertising. So today, in 2010, this statistic was from, the average consumer sees 5,000 messages every day. 5,000 messages. Now, in 1975, that was 500. That number has grown so much over the last 20 or 30 years that this is a generation that was raised on clever marketing, advertising, brand messages, everywhere we go, on our tablet, on our phone, on our computer. If we listen to the radio, on the radio. Messaging is everywhere. So what we saw was from let's say 08 to 1982, what do we see? We see television, we see radio, the rise of the infomercial, direct mail, right? These are definitely innovative ideas, innovative technologies over the course of 100 years. But what happened in the last 15 is mind-blowing. All of a sudden, in about 15, 17 years, the landscape changed. And this changed our needs. This changed our expectations, what we expect from the world, what we expect from education, what we expect from businesses. A lot of people think that millennials are entitled. Some millennials are entitled. But for the most part, it's not an entitlement, it's an expectation because it's what we grew up on. That's what was given to us, and that's turned us into consumers who don't have a lot of patience. We have only children syndrome, and I can say that because I'm an only child. If you're not an only child, you can't say that. All right, so information, technology. The next thing, what was happening in the 90s? The new economy. Think about when we were growing up. So from 1972, 1992, the economy's, all right, not bad, not good. There's ups, there's downs. But all of a sudden, in 1995 to about 1999, huge growth. Right? We see growth up, we see inflation down, jobs are everywhere. There is this period of abundance, and this just so happens to be the period where we're growing up. And we're sold this story. And the story is that if you go to school, and you do well, you follow the rules, you go to college, you graduate, you get a job, life's good, you get the house, you get the kids, you get the car, no problem. And then all of a sudden, that changed. And it just happened when we were graduating. 2001, right? We see everything sort of disappear. We see the bubble break. 2 million jobs were lost that year. By 2009, 11% unemployment. This is the time when we are coming into our prime. And I'm not saying that we deserved any of this. I'm not saying that we were entitled to it. But I'm just saying we were told we were going to get it. We were told that if we followed this model, something would happen. So when we're overly cautious, when we're untrusting at times, it's not because we're untrusting people. It's because we grew up in a time that taught us to be, especially with big companies, a little untrusting.